Hello guys, welcome back to this amazing YouTube channel. My name is Lona and I'm a planning and evolution engineer. And as a planning and evolution engineer, I touch on various aspects of IT. So if you're new here, karibu sana. This is a YouTube channel where we share various IT information which we feel like is useful for us to grow our IT career. So remember to check on my previous videos. Kindly watch them if you haven't already. Also leave a like on each and every of those videos. Share the videos as much as possible and kindly subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're watching right now and you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe. So today in this video, I want us to look at how to get started with Kubernetes. So if you're new to Kubernetes or if you've been wanting to learn Kubernetes, I think this is the video for you. I'm going to give like basic things that we need to know for us to get started with Kubernetes as a beginner. And I'm not going to go so much into a lot of details, just like the basic things that will help you to get started with Kubernetes. Then from there, you can actually build yourself slowly by slowly and finally become an expert in Kubernetes administration. So before I get into the video, I want to take this small opportunity to wish you a very happy 2023. I know you have like 2 days to the new year, so I really want to thank God for the year 2022, for the gift of life and for all the things that we've been able to achieve. And as we go into the new year 2023, which is like 2 days away, I really want to wish you the best. And I also want to believe that you had an amazing Christmas holiday. So personally, I did, and I was really happy for the small break that we had for Christmas. So going direct into the video, learning Kubernetes as a beginner. So before you start learning Kubernetes, there are definitely some of the things that you need to understand before you start learning Kubernetes. Remember, Kubernetes is an application that will be installed on a server. So before you start learning Kubernetes, there are definitely some of the things that you must have at your fingertips, so that it can give you like a base of you learning Kubernetes. So number one of those things is understanding of basic Linux commands. Remember, Kubernetes, at the end of the day, you're going to install on a Linux server. So you must be able to understand how to run applications on Linux servers, like the basic commands of installing an application, checking whether an application is running and things like that. So must have like the basic understanding of Linux commands before you start learning Kubernetes. That's number one. Number two, understand what you call containers. So remember, Kubernetes is it's an application that is used to manage containerized applications. So before even you learn what Kubernetes is all about, you must know what containers are so that you can actually manage using Kubernetes. So when you talk about container, it's like a unit of software that has like packaged code and all of its dependencies so that it can easily run anywhere. So that is what a container is all about. So if you have an application, you're developing an application and you want to put it in a unit of software such that it has everything that it needs to run, like its source code, it's all of its dependencies and anything that application needs to run in one unit of software. That is what container is all about. So you need to understand what containers are all about and how to create containers. Also, as a beginner, if you don't know how to create your own containers or container images, you can just use the publicly available images to start learning how to run containers. So how to run containers, you must have like an application that will help you to run containers. And one of the mostly commonly used application for running containers is Docker. So Docker is a really something also. Another thing that you really must know when you're learning containers, it's a commonly used application for running containers. So learn how to install Docker on your Linux servers and how to run containers using Docker. So you need to be able to know how to install Docker and how to be able to run containers using Docker. And with Docker, you know, there's Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is a registry for storing Docker images. So when you run a container, you run a container using what we call an image. So when you package your application with its source code and everything in a unit of software, that is what we call an image. And then you use that image to create a container. So Docker has like publicly available registry that you can simply just pull readily available images for you to start learning how to run containers. So once you install Docker, you're going to learn how to run containers using Docker command. So how to pull those images from Docker registry just by simply running a simple command like Docker pull, the name of the image, and then Docker run that name of the image to create a container. So you really need to understand these applications that are used for running containers. And I've said Docker is one of the most commonly used applications for running containers. So learn Docker, learn how to create, learn how to use to pull images from the Docker Hub registry, how to run those small containers using the readily available Docker images that you're pulling from Docker registry. And that's the easiest way for learning how to run containers. So once you understand Docker really well and know how to run containers using Docker, that will be like a good step already for you to learn Kubernetes. Once you understand what containers is all about, then you can actually introduce yourself to learning Kubernetes, because as I said, Kubernetes it's an open source tool for managing containers. So once you know what containers is, then it's easy for you to learn Kubernetes. So in a production environment where you have a lot of containers, you're running a lot of applications in different containers, then you need to have like a tool that will enable you to manage all these containers at a go. And actually Kubernetes is a tool for that. So once you know containers, then it's easy for you to know what Kubernetes is all about. And one thing I must mention is that I've been talking about Docker as an application for running containers, which is really key to note is that Kubernetes have actually stopped, or rather, yeah, they have stopped the support for Docker as a container engine. Remember, Docker as a beginner, it's a really nice tool for you to learn containers. It has a lot of documentation. You can easily get how to install Docker, how to run containers using Docker, how to pull images from Docker registry using Docker, and to run those containers using Docker. It's a really, really nice tool for beginners to learn containers with. But one thing you must notice that Kubernetes have actually stopped support for Docker in the current versions. So they currently use what you call CRI-O as a container engine. But as a beginner, just continue learning Docker, continue learning containers using Docker. And then when you install Kubernetes, I can maybe advise you to install the older versions of Kubernetes which still support Docker. That's just like for learning purposes. And then once you understand how to use Kubernetes with Docker, you can actually introduce yourself to the new application for running containers, which is CRI-O. So that's one thing that I really, really wanted to mention. But I'm not saying you jump direct to CRI-O. I feel like start learning with Docker, because it's a really, really easy to learn tool. It's a really, really easy to install and to use for running containers. And I feel like as a beginner, just start with that. Install the versions of Kubernetes which still support Docker, and learn with that. And then slowly by slowly, introduce yourself to the new application that's being used currently with Kubernetes to run containers. So that's one thing I really, really wanted to mention. So now once you understand what containers is all about, it's high time that you introduce yourself to Kubernetes. And as I said, it's an open source tool for managing this Kubernetes, containerized applications, especially in a production environment where you have a lot of containers running applications. So one thing you really need to know about Kubernetes is that it has you need to understand the architecture of Kubernetes. So it has the control plane and the worker nodes. So the control plane is where all this managing of containers happen. So it has like a number of applications running the control plane, which you really, really must understand. And then now the worker nodes, which are actually the actual servers where containers are running. So they're actually separated, especially in a production environment. You'll find that the control plane are running on their own servers and the worker nodes are running on their own servers, so that you have the managerial functions on the control plane, and then you have your pods, or rather your containers, running on the worker nodes. So in an actual production environment, you'll note that it's a cluster of the master node and the worker nodes. So running the managerial functions, and these other worker nodes running the actual pod. So that's the architecture as it is in a production environment. So once you start learning Kubernetes, you must have that in mind, that you usually have like a cluster of nodes, some nodes running the master nodes and the other nodes running the worker nodes, which are actually the nodes which run the actual containers. Now, when you're learning Kubernetes, as a person learning Kubernetes for the first time, I won't say that you go ahead and have like a number of servers for you to install the control plane and the worker nodes as a beginner. I would suggest that maybe you run the versions, the small versions of Kubernetes that have like the control plane and the worker nodes on the same server. These are the likes of Minikube, MicroK8s. So you can actually install those ones on your machine. If you're running like VirtualBox, for example, you can create a small Linux server, and then you run Minikube, or you run MicroK8s, and then from there you can actually start learning Kubernetes using that small virtual machine that has both the master node, the control plane and the worker node on the same node, instead of you maybe struggling to have like separate nodes for running the master nodes and the worker nodes, yet you are learning as a beginner. Because at this point I want you to have like something easier that can actually get you started. I actually started learning with Minikube. I still have Minikube on my machine, but currently I've been able to install like the different the whole cluster having the master node and the worker node separately. But when you're learning, as I said, like myself, I started learning with Minikube, which is really, really nice for someone starting to learn for the first time. So go online and, check on how to install Minikube and how to, run containers in Kubernetes using Minikube. So that's a really, really nice tool to start with as a beginner. If you don't want to use the minimal versions of Kubernetes like Minikube and microcreators, you can actually install like the cluster of a Kubernetes cluster using the recommended way of creating a Kubernetes cluster in a production environment, and that's using kubeadmin. So it's not actually hard. You can actually run like small virtual machines, especially if you're running VirtualBox. You can actually create two virtual machines and have one running the master node and the other one running the worker node. And then you actually install Kubernetes with kubeadmin, which is the recommended way of installing Kubernetes in a production environment. And I feel like you doing that will actually give you like an upper hand of knowing how Kubernetes is installed in a production environment instead of you using Minikube and microcreators, which is still good for learning. But I'm saying you can actually go ahead and learn how to install Kubernetes in the most recommended way, especially when it comes to a production environment. Just have like small virtual machines on your VirtualBox. Just two. One will run the master node, and the other one will run the worker node. So I'm going to leave in the description box like a link of a guide which I wrote on how to install Kubernetes in a production environment. You just have two servers, as I said. Don't have many servers, just for you to just get to know how to install Kubernetes in a production environment, which is not hard, as I said. And then instead of you using Minikube and microcreators, you can actually just jump ahead and install the actual Kubernetes cluster with kubeadmin, which is the recommended way of running Kubernetes in a production environment. So that being said, once you have your Kubernetes cluster up and running, either with Minikube or using kubeadmin, whichever, there are different things which you need to understand before starting to run applications in Kubernetes. So I'm going to mention these ones. I'm not going to go into details of them. I'm going just to list them. And then in my next video, we're going to go through them one by one. So number one of the things you need to know is a pod. What is a pod in Kubernetes? Number two, what is a deployment? Number three, what's a stateful set? Number four, what's a daemon set? Number five, what is a service? So I feel like those are the most basic things that you really, really need to know before running anything with Kubernetes, because that will give you like an understanding of what am I going to run right now. Am I going to run a pod? Am I going to run a deployment? Am I going to run a stateful set? What is a service? How am I supposed to expose my applications running on Kubernetes? So when you talk about pod, that's like a container. Yeah, it's actually like the smallest unit of in Kubernetes. Like it's like a container. So it's usually taken as a container, but a pod can actually have more than one container. So it's usually like taken as a container, but as I said, it can be one or more containers. And then when you talk about deployment, that's a way of managing your pods, like creating like replicas of your pod, scaling up and down. A deployment can actually help you to scale up and scale down of your pods running in a Kubernetes cluster. When you talk about stateful set, that's a way of managing stateful applications running in your Kubernetes cluster. And when you talk about daemon set, it's a way of making sure that at least a pod is running on each and every nodes in your Kubernetes cluster. And when you talk of service, it's a way of exposing your applications running in Kubernetes, either to other applications running within Kubernetes cluster or outside your Kubernetes cluster. So those are some of the things that we are going to go into in details in my next video. But at this point, I really hope that this video is actually helpful for you to get started with learning Kubernetes, right from understanding Linux commands, now but coming to knowing what containers is all about, now coming to understand what Kubernetes and how to install Kubernetes, and the most basic things that you really need to know before starting to run applications in Kubernetes cluster. So I really, really wish you the best as you start learning Kubernetes. And if you're learning Kubernetes already, kindly let's share. Hit the comment box. Just give your comments. Add anything that you feel like it's really useful for anyone learning Kubernetes for the first time to know. And I'll really, really appreciate. So at this point, I really hope that this video is going to be helpful to you. So kindly give a thumbs up if you feel like the video is good. Kindly share as wide as possible if you feel like there's someone who will really need this video, maybe to learn Kubernetes or to expand their knowledge in different areas of IT. So share the video as wide as possible. So thank you so much for always watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye, and again, happy new year 2023. Bye.